Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 367. I'm delighted to welcome back onto the podcast. It's been a little while. Welcome back on the podcast, Bram Swinnen. Bram, how are you?
I'm fine, Ben. Thank you for having me again. The last podcast was fun, so let's do it again.
Awesome. I'm really excited to have you back. I know you've had probably quite a lot of changes and been very busy in the time since you came on last time. So we can dive into that in a second. But Bram, just really briefly, because we want to get into some cool content for today, but can you give people just a very quick background on yourself, what you've done previously, but more importantly, maybe what you're doing now as well?
Yeah. I studied first a master in sports science. After my master in sports science, I did a master in physical therapy and rehabilitation. And then I also studied master, postmaster in manual therapy. I don't work too much manually. I work with people that are really good in that because if you don't do that every day a lot, you don't have it in your fingers, even if you know the technique. But my specialty is, and always has been, the combination between rehab and performance. I did that for several top basketball teams. And I think it was 2012, I switched to football. That was the team of Anji Mahachkala. At that moment, they had a lot of stars like Samuel Eto'o, some players from Real Madrid. That was the top team in Russia. And that's how I got in football. And I think since 2015, I opened my own practice where I focused on performance and rehab and with a lot of different athletes from football, basketball, volleyball, track and field, tennis, and cyclists. So those are the main athletes I see, but it can also be broader than that. So always the combination performance and rehab. And 3 years ago, we started the courses because there was a lot of demand. There were a lot of people asking, can we do an internship? So that's the reason that we started the courses. And yeah, the courses have picked up. And I also combine it now with my training facility, rehab, and consulting for federations and teams.
And you just mentioned before we started recording that the courses are taking you, well, the consulting as well is taking you around the world.
Yeah. The last 4 weeks, I was 3 weeks abroad. That's not always easy to combine it with my facility. Um, so the next weeks, I will be more here in Belgium.
Yeah, but it's opened up a lot of doors and opportunities for yourself as well, having the courses and doing the consulting as well.
Yeah. And probably the podcast I did with you last time and opened a lot of
Hopefully,
doors.
hopefully, yeah, hopefully that's the case. Oh, that's great to hear. No, Bram, it's really, like I said, it's really good to get you back on the podcast. And we're going to dive into a few topics that I know you can speak about that you use a lot and you've got a lot of knowledge around. And the first of which is something that we've seen a lot more often used in football now. I think people probably say because of the scheduling and the way that the fixtures are working out within football, and that's microdosing. So,
Hmm.
just to start with, I said we were going to start quite broad on some of these topics. Can you give us a bit of an introduction to microdosing and then maybe how
Hmm.
you've gone about using it as well?
Yes. I think microdosing, there's a lot of confusion. A lot of times you see on social media, especially LinkedIn, people talk about microdosing, but they're actually talking about minimal dosage. So there's some confusion about the two terms. So minimal dosage means that you apply, of course, the minimum volume, the minimum amount of load to still or to maintain or still make progress. Microdosing, the essence of microdosing is not the minimal dosage. It can be. So microdosing can also mean that you apply a minimal dosage, but the essence of microdosing is that you increase the frequency of training sessions and you split up the training volume over more sessions. And in team sports, basketball, also football, most teams, they play 2 times a week. And they play 2 times a week for a big part of the year. So the advantage of microdosing is that also with the starters, you can still put some sessions in even the day before the game. Because if you want to respect that you don't do performance session anymore 2 days before the game, 48 hours before the game, yeah, then you're not going to get a lot of sessions in a week where you have 2 games. So the idea is to split up the volume over more training frequencies, over more sessions, and even the day before the game or even the morning of the game, you can still put in some work. Of course, we're talking about minimal volume. Yes, we're talking, for example, the day before the game. Last time we spoke about velocity-based training. Velocity-based training is essential in microdosing because with velocity-based training, you have a lot more, control over the neuromuscular fatigue. So, for example, the session before the game, the load, yeah, of course, cannot be too high. And velocity-based training is essential. We know there, like the day before the game, I'm mostly limited to velocity loss 0% or velocity loss 5%, or do a few cluster sets in a certain velocity range. And that velocity range there, I want it to be a little bit higher. So above 0.7 meters per second, above 0.8 meters per second, that you have a lot of force production, but also still power production. The morning of the game, we know that high intensity lifting gives a very good neuropriming. So puts your nervous system in a state of alertness, and you basically, it fires from all cylinders. But of course, maybe just 1 or 2 sets. That's it. And still, we stay far away from fatigue. So, and that's another essence of microdosing. Microdosing, the big advantage of microdosing is because you split it up over more sessions, you have more data on a day-to-day basis. So that gives you the ability to follow up the athletes better on a daily basis. And I spoke about neuropriming. So basically, our focus till a few years ago was always, okay, we're doing performance training now to, in the mid or long term, to be better. So we do, for example, strength training now to be better in 2 or 3 months. But that's a focus that shifted and has to shift because basically I train, for example, what I train today is also to already improve the performance of the game, the next game. So I want to put my nervous system in a hyper, like increase the excitability of the nervous system. So you have more motor neurons firing. Also, they're more synchronized. So basically the nervous system is firing from all cylinders. And that gives you a little bit that edge during the game. So even the day before the game, you can work and you should work to really have that neuropriming.
What are some, you've sort of touched on it a little bit already, but what are some really important things we need to be aware of when we are planning or microdosing, and especially getting towards performance, whether that's on a weekend or whenever the game is? What are some important things we need to be wary of within those sessions?
Like I said, the morning of the game, like high intensity lifting, that gives a good neuropriming effect. Also, Olympic lifting can be a very good neuropriming the morning of the game. Of course, the morning of the game, that's the last piece of the puzzle you put in. Athletes have to feel comfortable with that. I will never push it on them, but that's the last piece. If you put everything together, the day before the game, we know that ballistics and moderate intensity strength they give a good neural priming effect. So ballistics, lighter loads like 30%, for example, jump squats, hex bar, deadlift jumps, jump shrugs, things like this. And 2 days before the game, plyometrics up to 60 contacts are quite good to have a neural priming effect the day of the game. I also still use plyometrics the day of the game, but very limited amount of contacts, like 15, 20 max. The reason why is because we see that after a plyometric session, you see an immediate boost in performance, but a drop again after 24 hours, mostly because of soreness. So if you do it the day before the game and you do 50, 60 contacts, then you might be in that drop exactly when the game is happening. So you want to avoid that.
So what are you looking at in terms of numbers then in contacts for the plyometrics then, Bram? Is that's obviously in under 50?
Yeah. What you also see, there's a good study. I think it was in professional hockey, and where they spread out. So they had 80 contacts over the whole week, but split up over 4 sessions.
Mm-hmm.
And that was more of that was equally effective for jump performance and for acceleration performance than double the amount over 2 sessions. So I'm using plyometrics and also simple things like drop jumps, because drop jumps is easy to measure RSI, and that's a very good measure for neuromuscular fatigue, a lot better than counter movement jump performance. So what I do mostly, I split up my plyometric volume over 3 or 4 sessions during the week. Also, always mostly in a complex training organization. So a heavy strength exercise, some plyometrics, or even like a Bulgarian method, like that you start at the high end, at the force end of the curve with a strength exercise, maybe an Olympic lift, a plyometric exercise, and even maybe some agility work, some sport-specific work.
Awesome. What sort of changes have you made to your approach with microdosing? Has there been anything that sort of progressed or transitioned for you over the last sort of few years of using it?
Yeah, I think it's indeed like 4 or 5 years ago, I was not really using it. I was doing more sessions over the week, basically every day a session, but then always like different kind of work. I still had more or less 2 strength sessions a week. I had some agility work, some neurocognitive work. Now I basically split that up. Like every day, I also do some kind of strength training. So that strength training can be strength, Olympic lifts, it can be ballistics, plyometrics, or a combination of those. But then basically it is, for example, in a week, you can have 4 or 5 sessions, maybe even 6. But of course, the volume of the sessions, you can be done. So you do the warm-up, 10 minutes training, and that can be the session. So the load, of course, is in that session is less. And yeah, the big advantage is also readiness testing. So it makes no sense to have testing every 6 weeks, because if I do a lot of testing today, also in football, there's no time for testing sessions. But if I do a testing session today, in 2 weeks, yeah, what is still the value of that data? Yeah. Basically, yeah, it's not usable anymore. So the big advantage, every day I gather some kind of metrics, and then it's very easy to follow. Also combined with what I used recently as well, that's Miocene. And Miocene is basically, it's electrostimulation, but it measures also the force output. So athletes, they don't have to do anything. So for example, they come into the locker room or they come into my practice, I put them on the Miocene, and it's a combination of high frequency and low frequency electrostimulation. and it measures the force output. If you're neuromuscular fatigued, then there's a bigger peripheral neuromuscular fatigue. There's a bigger decline in force output with low frequency stimulation compared to high. So there's less a drop in high, there's a lot more a drop in low. So that disbalance gives you an idea of the neuromuscular fatigue. Also, with neuromuscular fatigue, force output is a little bit less, but especially the timing of the force output changes. So that means that, after the stimulus, contraction is slower, and also relaxation is slower when the stimulus is gone. So with the Myosine, they basically put that in a single score for peripheral neuromuscular fatigue. It also gives an idea about central neuromuscular fatigue, of course. And athletes come in, I already see their state, the neuromuscular state they're in. Are they fatigued or are they ready to go? So that helps me to adapt my training, what I call auto-regulated periodization. So based on the metrics, so based on the Myosine measure, and based on the metrics of the former days, I make a decision how I slightly adapt my load.
And just with that, so once you've used Myosine, you've got the players in, you've got a bit of a picture in terms of the fatigue and what's going on with that player. You've just said there about how the program then gets changed, adapted. Would there be any sort of follow-up to the work that you do with Myosine in terms of additional testing, or is that then crosses over straight into the program?
The advantage of Myosine is that players can come in even without a warm-up because they don't have to do anything. They sit on the device. It takes 1.5 minutes and you have the measurement. But of course, I don't decide only on one metric. I combine it with, for example, contact times, a reactive strength index from former. That's why I said, like, okay, the drop jumps or the plyometrics, I split them up over several days. So over several days, I have a better idea how that RSI evolves. Of course, you cannot compare the RSI of a drop jump with the RSI of a different exercise. So you cannot compare apples with pears. But also in the strength training with velocity-based training, you have an idea about average velocities, the average velocity. And also you have an idea, for example, I like to implement speed squats on a pro squat device with pneumatic resistance. And I also measure eccentric time and eccentric velocity, because what we see basically is that counter movement jump, it can be used to measure neuromuscular fatigue, but it's not that sensitive. Sometimes we see a very big load that causes a lot of neuromuscular fatigue, but there's not a big drop in counter movement jump height. We tend to use too much performance metrics to measure neuromuscular fatigue. Performance metrics, they have a very high correlation, of course, to performance, sprinting, acceleration speed, and jump height, but they're not the best metrics. They're not the most sensitive metrics for neuromuscular fatigue or to predict injuries. So we see that eccentric metrics and timed metrics, so eccentric time or time to take off, reactive strength index, flight time divided by contraction time, which is very highly correlated with RSI. We see that those measurements, they're a lot more sensitive to acute and chronic neuromuscular fatigue. So I try to gather in my sessions. So in my daily sessions, I try to gather a lot of that data, and together with the Myosine measurement in the morning, I have a full picture. And I can decide, for example, imagine that an athlete comes in and we planned like really a speed strength session. So speed strength session, You want quality there. It's also there's also some motor learning involved. You want to make it sport specific. So you cannot do that with a fatigue nervous system. So if we see fatigue there, neuromuscular fatigue from the metrics, the previous days, from the Miocene measurement, I can decide to say, okay, I'm going to change that speed strength session more in a regular strength, moderate intensity, or even some activation work. Mm-hmm. So that, yeah, I don't plan things that for which the nervous system of that athlete is not susceptible for that day. So it doesn't always have to be that. Most of the times it's just minor adjustments. For example, that you adjust a little bit the load, you bring the load a little bit down, or you can also see, okay, perfect, the recovery is like I expected, I do what I planned. So that's a little bit what I call auto-regulate periodization. And in the beginning, it takes some work. But of course, the more you know the athlete, the more you know what to plan, on which day, which kind of loads, so that you have recovery, or that you're really looking for that neuropriming towards games.
Coaches, I know you don't have time to network. The season is a busy time and I know you're in preparation for your next game, but you know the value in your network and networking within football. If you don't have time to network, do this instead. Sign up to the Football Fitness online community. The community is home to hundreds of practitioners based right around the world. As a member, you get access to the very best football fitness content from practitioners like Jerome Peters, Dr. Ben Rosenblatt, and many others. You'll be invited into our members only WhatsApp group, which allows you to participate in regular discussions and share any challenges that you face within your role. You also get discount from some of our partner companies, discount to football fitness events, and early insights into job opportunities within the game. The good news is you can sign up today for free. Sign up to our 30-day free trial. Yeah, so all of these are pieces of the puzzle, aren't they, that are giving you bits of information that then allows you to optimize what you're doing within that session. How much of that, Bram, then goes potentially the other way, that it's like a real window of opportunity to get some work into that player?
Yeah, exactly. I think, of course, a lot of people, a lot of teams, they were already doing like the counter movement jumps and also looking at more like time to take off measurements, time metrics. Basically, the idea of my sessions, of my microdosing, is to implement everything I need into the session as well, also for measurements, that I have enough data on, especially the important days. I want data on match day -1. I want data after a heavy session, the day after a heavy session. I prefer to also have data the day of the game. So that can be from a micro dosing, like 2-3 sets in the morning before the game. Miocene, I try to measure that on a daily basis. And obviously the passive side of Miocene is a big benefit as well, that like you said, players don't have to be warmed up or anything like that to go in and use Miocene. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And basically it's also embedded testing. Athletes, they don't have the feeling that they're tested. Basically every testing is implemented, it's in training. So we're doing minimal things to really, for the purpose of testing, basically everything is training. Yeah, it's all part of it. That makes sense. And obviously where you've touched on the real benefit of microdosing is that you're getting that picture on a daily basis, aren't you, rather than waiting for the next block of testing to be done, which could be, if you're waiting for an opportunity within football, it's probably going to be waiting a while, isn't it? Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, you also, before you pushed the record, you also told me you wanted to go a little bit into the future. What's the future developments? I think more and more we will go to artificial intelligence, and to really train those logarithms, you need a lot of data. Yeah. And you need a lot of data in a high frequency. That will best train those models so they can make better predictions in the future about injury, the risk of injury, and also about performance.
Yeah, that's going to be a whole interesting topic, isn't it? Which I'd hope to get you back on to discuss that a bit more, Bram. But just around match day. So we said about sort of monitoring on match day and doing the work before a game. How much of that then would lead to a conversation or potential conversation with coaches? So if things are really flagging up about a player in terms of their fatigue and their readiness for that game, how much of that will lead to conversations with a coach?
We tend, at the moment, I'm more consulting different teams. So
Yeah.
I'm not connected on a daily basis or almost daily basis like I was before. But the worst thing you can do is go to a coach and say he cannot play.
Yeah.
Then you lose the player, you lose the coach. I never did that. But a few times we saw, of course, at that moment, we're still not using that much data in the sense we're not microdosing, we're not using Myosine yet. But we saw in the metrics, we saw a drop for example, 4 or 5 days, or you really saw a plateau, or in some metrics like regression. And we spoke to the player, and every time they said, yes, I'm not really fatigued, but I miss that sharpness. And what we did was speak to the coach, like adapting the load. Of course, in our sessions, we were the first ones to adapt the load. And in the sessions, with the football sessions, especially the tactical football work, the small-sided games, everything what was football related, we tried to keep in. But we lowered, the conditioning stimuli. We lowered the load of performance sessions, maybe a little bit of the football part, but not that it had a big impact on the team, on team training. And what you saw was basically within a week or 10 days, all those players, they went back to an efficient neuromuscular state. And then you feel the players, they really like that because they're like, you have that individual approach. They really have the feeling, okay, they know what's good for me and what's not. And same for the coach. So it doesn't affect them, but they have a lot of information, they get informed, and they also know that their players are kept in good shape.
Because that's the natural sort of cycle of a season, right? Where players are going to sort of experience that. And I suppose that feedback on top of everything that you've talked about in terms of monitoring and testing players is really crucial, isn't it? If a player's coming to you and saying, I'm really feeling that I'm lacking that sharpness, that's like a key. That's just as important as something coming up on myosine or the jumps being off. Like, it's a really important factor, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you also see so many top teams also in Premier League investing so much their performance department or the sports science department. Yeah, there are a lot of data analysts, a lot of sports scientists. So top teams are investing a lot of money in those departments because they realize that is extremely important. You also see that the game always gets more explosive, faster. Even that rehab and performance training improved. We still see we don't really see a decline in the percentage of injuries. For example, hamstring injuries, serious hamstring injuries where you lose more than 30 days. I read a few days ago in the Premier League, like 53% of the serious hamstring injury, 53% of the hamstring injuries are now serious injuries where you miss at least 30 days. So I think because the game got so explosive, the load went up. Yeah, that's managing players' health. That's of course that's extremely essential.
100%. And it's also interesting this time of year, isn't it, as we record?
Yeah.
Recording this in November, in a lot of countries heading into, especially Premier League, the UK heading into a really busy period through November and then especially into December as well. So that then becomes even more important, doesn't it, to know exactly what's going on with each and every one of your players?
Yeah, absolutely. I think because before I worked with a lot of NBA players, and yeah, when I in football, I had a question of a journalist once, like, yeah, NBA, you come from the NBA. I was not with an NBA team to make sure. I was with European teams, but I also worked in the summer a lot with NBA players. And he asked me, okay, that must be really complicated to manage. Of course, it's complicated to manage, but a European football team or season is a lot more difficult to manage because in the NBA, the season is 7 months. You still have a good off season and a very good preseason. So you have time to build, and then it's easier to maintain. Basically, in football, off season, I know a lot of players, they can be happy if they get 3 weeks,
Yeah.
4 weeks max.
Yeah.
Preseason is also minimum, and you already have maybe the Super Cup. You have yeah. Even in the preseason, there are already games that are considered important. So yeah, basically it's one long season, and with fixtures twice a week, yeah, that's for me more complicated to manage than an like an NBA team. It's of course it's not it stays complicated, but yeah, the long seasons, more fixtures getting played. There are more fixtures than in the schedule. Yeah, that makes it harder to really keep the players close to their top shape.
With that sort of trend in mind, Bram, because we're talking there about fixtures, competitions, which could be a whole other debate, like with these obviously World Cup, international competitions, you've got all the your domestic cup competitions, but then everything else that's maybe being created as well. There's going to be more and more of that coming along, as well as what you've talked about in terms of the intensity of the games and the demands that we put on the players. If we're looking at sort of future trends and maybe future focuses for us as practitioners, we've talked a lot about fatigue, readiness, testing, monitoring. Is there anything else that you'd look at to say, this is where I'd advise coaches to be paying attention to look forward to the future challenges that we're going to be facing?
Yeah, I think you already said it all.
More of the above. Yeah.
Yeah. I think in the future, I think the microdosing and the embedded testing, that's already a game changer. Also more new technologies, like for example, myosine, where players don't have to put in any effort. And in 1.5 minutes, you have an analysis. And together with in the future, of course, it already exists, but of course, it takes also some time and good data to train the logarithms in artificial intelligence. So I think also in the future, artificial intelligence will never be a black box because it's always the staff that needs to make the decision based on the inform of the system of the artificial intelligence.
I suppose it's a worry for some practitioners with that, though, isn't it? That they think jobs are going to get replaced. But you've just made a really good point in that.
Yeah,
everything.
I think we're absolutely not there yet. That the artificial intelligence makes the decision.
Yeah,
I think the decision has to be made by performance coach, fitness coach, physical therapist. That really, it's a really complex injuries. We still, from research, don't have a full understanding. Look at hamstring injuries. They're studied so much, but there's still, for example, the thickness of the aponeurosis, things that are mentioned in over the last years. So yeah, the complexity is enormous. And at this moment, artificial intelligence can help us, but it's the staff that needs to make the decision.
Well, on that, with I suppose the other angle is you would really encourage practitioners to be upskilling in terms of artificial intelligence and learning how to use it, collecting the data like you've just said about before to really optimize what they're doing.
What you already see in top teams now is that you basically have already IT specialists that are working full time for a team, sometimes even two or three, and they work close together with the sports science department. So yeah, I think that will be also in the future maybe more and more the case. I think for top teams they can have their own IT specialist, and I think for teams with less budgets, there will be systems on the market that you pay like a monthly or annual fee.
Yeah, but it's always going to be interesting, isn't it, what comes out of those models and in terms of advising how to make training more optimal and facing the challenge that we've talked about with fixtures, with intensity, and with injuries and all these things that we face, to have an additional information that comes out that maybe informs our program is an interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And what's very clear, because I together with an IT team, they did this for some professional teams. So we developed some logarithms for injury prediction and performance prediction. And yeah, you need very good data, qualitative data, over a high frequency to really train the logarithms. And after 2 years of training with a lot of data, of course, sometimes they can help you make a decision, but also sometimes they were completely off.
Yeah.
So I think we're not there yet. But I think in the future, those logarithms will be better. Of course, it's a very complicated matter. So it's also what they call bullshit in is bullshit out. So the metrics that you put in, yeah, they have to be high quality metrics, accurate metrics on a regular basis. I think that's extremely important.
Yeah, and I suppose that's without even touching on the whole interpersonal side of what we do within our roles as well. Communication with the players.
Yeah, exactly.
We've not even touched on that, but that's obviously the other really important side that's not going to have as well, isn't it? But
Yeah.
at the same time, it can help and inform what we do and optimize our programming as well.
Absolutely. And I think you see, top teams, they're already using, they're optimizing their IT, implementing artificial intelligence, but you don't see that they're using less staff members. AI is not replacing at the moment any jobs in professional sports. It only becomes more complicated, and personal judgment and that personal relationship that stays important.
100%. So the next podcast we're going to do, Bram, is not going to be an AI version of you.
We don't. I don't have my own IT specialist.
Not yet. Not yet.
Otherwise, we could create an avatar that would be time-wise, that would be a lot more efficient.
It'll make it easier for you traveling around the world. Put it that
way. And less expensive.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Bram, that was superb. Thank you. I feel like we've covered some really key information now. Again, especially this time of year. Everything you spoke about, fatigue, monitoring, I think it's really important. The work that you've obviously done with Myosine, I think people will really benefit from. So I really appreciate you coming back on the podcast.
Yeah. Thank you. It's always a nice chat with you, Ben. So anytime for you, I'm always available.
Brilliant, mate. Thank you very much. Bram, if people have got questions or they want to check out the courses or they want to get in touch with you, maybe about the consulting, where would you direct them?
We have our website, that's integratedperformancetraining.com. And there you also have a contact form, or you have the info@integratedperformancetraining.com email. So people can get information on the website, and they can also get in touch if they want.
Amazing. Bram, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. Have a nice day.